A honeybee's sting isn't a defense, it's a suicide pact. She drives it in, the barbs catch under your skin, and when she tries to pull away, she tears her own abdomen open and leaves part of herself behind. She'll be dead within the hour. She does it anyway. Somewhere in the savannas of East Africa, one population of honeybee took that trade and built an entire way of life on top of it. Then, in October of 1957, 26 of those colonies got loose in Brazil. What happened over the next 33 years is described in the literature as one of the most spectacular biological invasions of all time. It crossed 2 continents. It has been blamed for something like 1,000 human deaths. And it stopped only when it ran into weather it couldn't handle. And before we're done, I want to tell you about an 82-year-old rancher in South Texas. In July of 1993, he walked up to a wall in an abandoned building on his own property. He found out exactly what had arrived. To understand why this bee is the way it is, you have to go back a lot further than Brazil. Go back before flowers. Somewhere in the Jurassic, well over 150 million years ago, a group of wasps did something that reshaped the next several hundred million years of life on land. They took the ovipositor, the tube a female insect uses to lay eggs, and turned it into a hypodermic needle. Scientists call that whole group the aculeata, pronounced aculeata, which translates roughly to the stinging ones. Bees, ants, and every wasp that has ever ruined a picnic belong to it. That origin has a consequence most people never think about. The sting is a modified egg-laying organ, which means only females have one. Every bee that has ever stung you was female. Male honeybees, the drones, never developed one and can't sting at all. The stinger came first. The bee came much later. Around 125 million years ago, in the Cretaceous, flowering plants were spreading across the world and changing the rules of everything. One lineage of apoid wasps, ambush predators that hunted other insects, paralyzed them and stuffed them into burrows as living food for their larvae, quit hunting. The leading explanation is almost comically simple. The prey they caught on flowers came home dusted in pollen. The larvae ate the pollen along with the meat. Over enough generations, the meat became optional, then unnecessary, and the hunters became gatherers. A bee is a wasp that went vegetarian and kept the knife. We can actually hold a piece of this in our hands, and the best specimen came out of American ground. In the 1920s or 30s, a collector named Alfred Hawkins picked up amber near Kincora in Burlington County, New Jersey. It sat in a collection for decades before researchers at the American Museum of Natural History looked closely and found a bee inside it. They named it Cretotrigona prisca, pronounced Cretotrigona prisca, and it dates to the last stretch of the Cretaceous, roughly 70 to 66 million years ago. That bee was in New Jersey during the same closing stretch of the Cretaceous that produced Tyrannosaurus rex out in Montana. It was a stingless bee. The oldest bee we can confirm had already given the weapon up. There's an older candidate, a fossil from Burmese amber called Melitosphex burmensis, pronounced Melitosphex burmensis, around 100 million years old, with wasp features and branched hairs suggesting it carried pollen. It was announced as the earliest known bee. Later work has argued it isn't a bee at all. That argument is still live. The honest version is that the bee fossil record is thin, amber is a lottery, and molecular clocks tell us bees are older than anything we've dug up. The sting a honeybee carries today is not a simple spike. 2 barbed lancets ratcheting against each other, alternating, each one dragging the other deeper. Sink it into something soft-skinned, like a mammal, and it locks. When the bee pulls away, the sting stays, along with the venom sac, the muscles that drive it, and a section of her nerve tissue. Detached from the bee, that assembly keeps working. It keeps pumping venom into you for up to a minute after the animal that delivered it has flown off to die. This is why every beekeeper will tell you to scrape a sting out sideways with a fingernail or a credit card instead of pinching it. Pinching squeezes the sac and injects the rest of the dose. The venom is called apitoxin, and its dominant ingredient is a peptide named melitin, pronounced meh-lit-in, which makes up somewhere around half to 60% of the dry weight. Melitin punches holes in cell membranes. Alongside it, there's phospholipase A2, which dismantles the fats holding cells together. There's also hyaluronidase, which loosens the connective tissue in your skin so the rest of the dose spreads faster. Notice what that cocktail is optimized for. Not paralysis, not a quick kill. Pain spreading fast from an animal that weighs about as much as a paperclip's shadow. Against a honey badger or a bear, killing isn't the goal. Teaching is. And there's a component in the sting that has nothing to do with damage at all. When a worker stings, she releases a compound called isopentyl acetate. To a human nose, it smells like bananas. To the colony, it's a targeting marker. It says there is a threat. It is here. Sting this exact spot. Other workers home in on it. This is why stings in a mass attack cluster instead of spreading out. And it's why experienced beekeepers won't eat a banana or wear banana-scented anything before opening a hive. Smoke works partly because it drowns out that signal. Picture the sequence from the inside. You feel one sting on the back of your neck, sharp, hot, not that bad. Half a second later, there's a faint, sweet smell you can't place. And then the air around your head fills because you're now wearing a chemical flag that says, "Hit here." Every bit of that is standard equipment. The docile European honeybee in your neighbor's backyard hive carries the same barbed lancets, the same melitin, the same banana signal. Nothing about the weapon changed in Brazil. What changed was the trigger. So why does one colony let a beekeeper poke through its combs on a Saturday afternoon while another chases a man on a tractor for a quarter mile? The answer isn't in the venom at all. Look instead at what has spent the last few thousand years trying to break into each of those hives. Two populations of the same species, Apis mellifera, pronounced Aypis mellifera, spent thousands of years solving completely different problems. In Northern Europe, the enemy is winter. A colony that wants to see April has to build an enormous population and pack away enormous honey stores. Then it sits on them for 5 months, burning down the reserve. That shapes temperament. Nest sites are large and hard to find. Predators are relatively few. Abandoning a nest in October is a death sentence. So European bees are built to hoard, to endure, and to be slow to escalate. In the savannas and lowlands of East and Southern Africa, winter isn't the problem. Getting robbed is. The honey badger digs colonies out, ants pour into them, birds go after the brood, and people have been raiding wild nests there for as long as there have been people there, following honey-guide birds to the trees and taking everything inside. A colony in that world faces theft attempts constantly, year-round, from things much larger than itself. Apis mellifera scutellata, pronounced scutellata, the East African lowland honeybee, arrived at a different answer to the same question of how to stay alive. Don't hoard, because stores you can't defend just make you a bigger target. Nest small, in whatever cavity is available. Reproduce fast, throwing off far more swarms per year than European colonies do. Respond to any disturbance instantly with everything you have. And if the harassment keeps coming, don't die defending the place. Pack up the entire colony and leave. Beekeepers call that absconding, and African bees do it readily. Set against that history, what we call aggression is really just a dial turned down. Their alarm threshold sits lower than a European colony's. Their response curve is far steeper, and the numbers are stark. Studies comparing the two have found that an African-derived colony reacts to a disturbance in a few seconds, where a European colony might take 20 or 30 seconds. It commits close to 10 times as many defenders. It pursues an intruder for a quarter mile, where a European colony gives up after 50 or 100 feet. And it stays keyed up for hours afterward, so the tractor that set them off at 9 in the morning can get you stung at noon. That was the animal Warwick Estivum Kerr went to Africa to find. He had no idea it would end up carrying his name for the rest of his life. Kerr was a Brazilian geneticist, and in 1956 he traveled to Tanzania and South Africa on behalf of his government with a very practical assignment. Brazilian beekeeping was struggling. The European bees that had been imported from Portugal were poorly suited to a tropical country, and honey yields were bad. African bees, everyone knew, were spectacular producers in hot climates. In their home range, they had been recorded bringing in up to 3 times the honey of European stock. Kerr brought back 63 live queens. 48 of them survived to the following year at a research station near Rio Claro in São Paulo state. The plan was to cross them with European stock and get the productivity without the temper. The hives were fitted with queen excluders, which are just screens with gaps sized so that small workers can pass through and the larger queens and drones cannot. Simple, effective, and completely invisible in purpose to anyone who doesn't keep bees. In October of 1957, a visiting beekeeper stopped by the apiary, looked at the screens, decided they were obstructions, and took them off. 26 swarms flew into the surrounding countryside. Kerr's assumption was that they'd either die out or breed into the local European population and disappear. The genetics ran the other direction. In the tropics, the African traits weren't a liability, they were an advantage, and the African maternal line spread through feral populations across Brazil while European characteristics thinned out. Within a few years, farmers around Rio Claro were reporting livestock being killed by wild bees. Kerr spent the rest of his career living with that. He was also arrested and persecuted under Brazil's military dictatorship after publicly denouncing the torture of a nun. That part never made the newspapers. He died in 2018 at 96 years old, still best known for one afternoon and one piece of wire mesh. The spread averaged roughly 200 to 300 miles a year, which is a difficult number to feel until you frame it as a road trip. Turn a colony loose in Miami at that rate, and its descendants reach Seattle in about a decade, and nobody is driving them. They moved through Brazil in the 1960s, up through Venezuela and Colombia, into Central America in the 1980s, and across Mexico by the end of that decade. On October 15, 1990, the first wild colony in the United States was found near Hidalgo, Texas. The national press treated it like an invasion movie. Hidalgo, which is a small town in the Rio Grande Valley, took a different approach and leaned all the way in. They spent $20,000 on a 2,000-pound statue of a bee, put it downtown, and declared themselves the killer bee capital of the world. It's still there. You can go take a picture with it. Then the advance slowed down, and the thing that stopped it wasn't a program or a pesticide or a quarantine. It was winter. The trait that makes these bees successful in the tropics is small nests holding small stores. A colony built that way can't sit out a long cold season with nothing coming in. The line stalled across the southern tier of the country. Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, southern Nevada, parts of southern California, chunks of Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana. Florida confirmed them in 2005. North of that, they've never established. The deadliest bee on the planet was turned back by a January in Missouri, which brings us back to South Texas, 3 years after Hidalgo. On July 15, 1993, an 82-year-old rancher named Lino Lopez went to deal with a colony on his land. It had moved into the wall of an abandoned building, something every rancher in the country has done at some point with a smoker and some patience. He was stung roughly 40 times. He died. The pathologist who performed the autopsy attributed it to acute pulmonary edema, fluid flooding the lungs in response to the venom load. Samples were sent to a federal lab in Maryland, which confirmed the bees were Africanized. The colony in that wall held somewhere between 40 and 60,000 bees, and 40 is a very small number. It's nowhere close to a toxic dose for a healthy adult. The rough clinical figure is around 8 to 10 stings per pound of body weight before venom load alone turns lethal. For a 180-pound man, that's well over 1,000. People have survived more than that. People have also died from a small handful because individual sensitivity varies enormously and because a body that's 82 years old is not a body that's 30. When someone does take hundreds or thousands of stings, the damage is systemic. Melittin ruptures red blood cells and skeletal muscle. The wreckage floods into the bloodstream and the kidneys try to filter it out, which is a job they aren't built for. Doctors call the muscle breakdown rhabdomyolysis, and it can shut kidneys down entirely. Victims sometimes survive the attack, get admitted, look stable, and then deteriorate days later. Brazil has been running clinical trials on a dedicated antivenom for exactly this, because they see it often enough to need one. If you ever end up in the middle of it, the advice from every extension service in the southern United States is blunt. Run immediately in a straight line, covering your face with your shirt, and keep going well past the point where you think you've cleared them. Don't swat, because crushing bees releases more of the banana signal. Don't stand still. Don't jump in a pond, because they'll wait above the surface and you have to breathe eventually. Get inside a car or a building and accept that a few will follow you in. Running works because you can actually win that race. A honeybee cruises at 12 to 15 miles an hour, and a healthy adult can beat that over open ground, which tells you something uncomfortable about who ends up dying in these attacks. The people who can't run, the elderly, the very young, somebody who trips, somebody working alone on a ladder. For the record, bees, wasps, and hornets together kill somewhere around 60 to 100 Americans a year. That's more than snakes, spiders, and scorpions combined. The overwhelming majority of those deaths are single stings triggering anaphylaxis in someone allergic, not swarms. Ask a Brazilian beekeeper about the killer bee today and you'll get an answer that sounds insane in English. The disaster worked. The descendants of those escaped swarms turned Brazil into a major honey exporter, and the single biggest customer for what it ships is the United States. The Africanized bees turned out to be more resistant to varroa mites, the parasite that has been devastating European stock worldwide, and they thrive in heat that flattens Italian bees. Beekeepers across Latin America adapted their equipment, their spacing, and their handling and got on with it. The bees themselves have also been shifting. Africanized bees reached Puerto Rico in 1994. Within about 30 years, researchers sequencing the island's colonies were looking at a population that had gone markedly gentler while keeping its heat tolerance and its mite resistance. On a small island with people everywhere, the colonies most likely to be destroyed were the ones that came out swinging. Selection pressure changed, and the animal changed with it, fast enough for us to watch. The honest answer to the question in the title is that nothing here evolved to kill anyone. What evolved was a colony that treats every disturbance as a robbery already underway. Thousands of years on a continent full of honey badgers, ants, and hungry primates carrying smoke and axes will do that, because in that world, the disturbance usually was one. It's a burglar alarm with a hair trigger, tuned by predators that no longer exist in the places these bees now live. There are no honey badgers in Harlingen. There are lawn mowers, weed trimmers, and old men clearing out a wall. The bee is running the same program it always ran. Somebody moved the hardware. The sting itself is older than almost anything you associate with it. It predates the honeybee. It predates the flowers the honeybee lives on. It was already something like 90 million years old by the time Tyrannosaurus rex turned up. It sat in a New Jersey pine forest in a bee that had already stopped using it while the last of the Cretaceous burned. 150 million years of iteration produced a weapon so effective that a single insect weighing almost nothing can drive off an animal 10 million times its size. And it can only be used once. Every sting a colony spends is a worker it will never get back, a life traded for a message. That's the arrangement, and it's held for longer than there have been mammals worth stinging. We found the version of that arrangement with the lowest threshold on Earth and put it on a boat. Then we carried it 5,000 miles from everything it ever learned to fear. They're not coming for you. They just haven't figured out yet that they got moved. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.